Malik Johnson had always walked home from school the same way, through the park, past the old oak tree, and by the rusty, broken bench that always seemed out of place in the otherwise serene green space. It wasn't much, but it was his quiet time. The sounds of the birds and the soft breeze in the trees gave him a sense of peace. Today, however, that peace was broken. It was a late afternoon, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun began to set. Malik's backpack was heavy with textbooks, and his feet shuffled across the grass, tired from a long day at school. As he passed the bench, something caught his eye. There, half hidden beneath the seat, was a plain brown envelope. He stopped in his tracks. Maybe it's just a letter, he thought, or someone's lost paperwork. He was about to walk on, but curiosity tugged at him. He bent down, picked up the envelope, and turned it over in his hands. No name, no address, just a faint smudged red mark on the back, like someone had stamped it with something, but then tried to wipe it away. Malik opened it carefully, his heartbeat quickening for reasons he couldn't explain. Inside were stacks of $100 bills, so Crispin knew they looked like they had just been printed. He counted them quickly. 20 grand. At least. His mouth went dry. The weight of the cash felt surreal in his hands. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. For a moment, Malik stood frozen, staring at the money. His mind raced. This could change everything, he thought. His family was struggling, and this amount could cover bills, groceries, maybe even some of his college tuition. He could buy things his mother had always dreamed of. But then another thought crossed his mind. What if it's a mistake? What if someone is looking for this? He glanced around, trying to shake the sensation that he was being watched. No one was in sight. Just the usual quiet of the park. Malik tucked the envelope under his jacket, determined to do the right thing. "I'll take it to the police," he told himself. He began walking quickly toward the park exit when he felt a sudden shift in the air. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. From across the street, a man stood still, watching him. He wore a dark suit, too well dressed for a simple park. The man's gaze was intense, his eyes locked onto Malik as though he could see straight through him. Malik felt a chill run down his spine. His grip tightened around the envelope, his steps quickening. What the hell is going on? The man didn't move, didn't say a word. He simply stared. The whole scene felt too strange to ignore. Malik's pulse thudded in his ears. He glanced down at the envelope again, and then, with a final glance at the man, he broke into a sprint. He didn't stop until he was safely inside his house. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button below. What would you do if you found that much money? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping twists and turns in Malik's journey. Inside his room, Malik sat on his bed, the envelope still tucked under his shirt. He stared at the money, torn between excitement and dread. "I can't keep this," he whispered to himself. But the idea of giving it away, reporting it to the police, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that doing so might lead to something much bigger than he was prepared for. The weight of the decision settled in his chest. What if the man he saw in the park was looking for the money? What if the money wasn't meant for him at all? Who would even leave that much cash lying around? That night, as Malik lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, hoping for a distraction. But the message was anonymous. No name, no profile picture. Just a text. "You don't know what you found. Don't report it. It's not just money. It's a message." Malik's stomach turned. His heart raced. What was this all about? Was it some kind of joke? He stared at the screen, unsure whether to respond or ignore it. A part of him wanted to forget about it, but another part, the part that knew something was off, couldn't let go. He lay awake for hours, listening to the soft hum of the night, trying to make sense of the strange encounter. Eventually sleep overtook him, but the mystery of the envelope and the man who watched him lingered in his mind. The day after Malik found the money, he tried to ignore the unease gnawing at him. His thoughts were clouded with conflicting emotions, excitement about what he had found, dread about what it could mean, and confusion about what he should do. The money was tucked under his bed, hidden away, but it felt like it weighed more than it should. Each time Malik glanced at it, he could feel the pull of temptation, the idea that it could change his life forever. Okay, But that wasn't the life he wanted. Or was it? The park felt like a distant memory, like a completely different world. Malik's high school classes were the same: English, history, gym. But everything felt muted. The conversations around him seemed far away, like he was hearing them underwater. His friends joked about the usual stuff: the latest social media drama, the most recent video game release, the upcoming prom. Malik half listened, forcing a smile and nodding along. But his mind was elsewhere. It was during lunch that he felt it again, the sensation of being watched. He didn't know why it hit him so strongly in that moment. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to fall just a little too perfectly on the cafeteria walls, or how the noise from his classmates seemed muffled. He felt like he was on the edge of something, teetering on the edge of a cliff, unable to see where it led. But something inside him told him it was dangerous to look down. His phone buzzed. Malik looked at it, instinctively checking the notification. It was a message from an unknown number. "You don't know what you found. Don't report it. It's not just money. It's a message." Malik's heart skipped a beat. He looked around the lunchroom, trying to shake off the sudden wave of cold that swept over him. The text was chilling, and yet it didn't surprise him. The night before, he had felt something was wrong. Something more was at play here than just a random find in the park. Then he took a closer look. All the deceased were on the ground. Everyone. Was this from the man he had seen across the street, the man in the dark suit who had watched him? The thought made his stomach churn. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, but Malik barely heard it. He tucked his phone back into his pocket, his fingers lingering on the screen, as if he could still feel the presence of whoever had sent the message. Who would be sending him these cryptic warnings? Was it a prank, or something more serious? That night, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching him. His mother was busy with work, and his younger sister was tucked in bed, leaving Malik alone in the house. His bedroom door was cracked open, letting in the faint glow of streetlights from outside. Malik stared at the ceiling, the money still hidden under his bed, feeling the weight of it even though he couldn't see it. He needed to know more. He couldn't keep ignoring this, pretending it would all just go away. The text messages were just the beginning. But who could he talk to? If he told anyone, they'd think he was crazy. They'd think he'd lost his mind over a pile of cash. He walked a few blocks in the rain and backed up, a tiny mix from his revenue and a large thankfulness for his friends and family. And yet, the nagging suspicion that someone was watching him never went away. It was worse at night when everything was still. The silence in his room felt almost suffocating. Malik got up and moved to the window, pulling back the curtains just a little to peer out into the street. There was nothing, just the usual quiet, empty roads. But his instincts told him that something was out there. The next day, Malik decided he couldn't wait any longer. He had to do something. He needed answers. He took the money from under his bed and shoved it into his backpack, his heart pounding with anxiety. He wasn't going to keep it. He couldn't. He had to take it to the police. The guards laughed, his voice low and contained. As he walked toward the police station, the same unease crept over him. He could feel his hands shaking slightly, his footsteps uneven as he tried to shake off the feeling of being followed. He turned around once, twice, half expecting to see the same man in the dark suit, lurking somewhere in the distance. But there was no one. He made it to the police station and stood outside for a moment, his hand on the door handle. He hesitated, his mind raced. What if this was all some kind of trap? What if the money was connected to something much bigger? Something dangerous? As he stood there lost in thought, his phone buzzed again. He pulled it out quickly, half expecting another message from the unknown number. His heart sank when he saw the notification. Another text, this time with a new message. "If you take it to the police, you'll be making a mistake. The consequences will be worse than you can imagine." Malik's breath caught in his throat. This time, the words felt different, more urgent, more threatening. He looked around, but no one seemed to be paying him any attention. The street was empty, the world carrying on as usual. But inside, Malik felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, with nothing but darkness below him. He walked away from the station. He didn't know why, but he couldn't go through with it. Something told him that doing so would only make things worse. He had to think this through, figure out who was behind these messages and why they were so desperate to stop him from reporting the money. He turned quickly to the large library at the center of the station, actually a storage room and several other rooms, where he tied himself to a work desk. The following days were a blur. Malik went to school, went home, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every time his phone buzzed, his stomach would flip in anticipation. Was it another cryptic message? Or worse, a threat? Each time he felt like he was unraveling, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. He started paying closer attention to everything around him, every car that passed by, every stranger he saw on the street. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following him. His friends noticed his distraction, his distance, but Malik brushed it off. He didn't want to burden them with something they wouldn't understand. It was Friday afternoon when the message came again. Alec's phone buzzed once more, and when he opened it, he found a photo of him, taken from a distance, standing in front of the police station, the envelope tucked under his arm. The photo was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. It was him. "You don't want to make this mistake," the message read. "Return the money now." Malik's blood ran cold. This wasn't a prank. This was real. Exercise again. He backed away from his phone, staring at the picture, the weight of it settling on his chest. Whoever had been following him, whoever had been sending the messages, they knew where he was, what he had, and they weren't going to stop. As Malik stared at the phone, his heart pounding, the door to his room creaked open. He turned around, but it wasn't his mother. It was someone else. Joan Cordet, staring up at him. A man in a dark suit stepped into the room, his face cold and unreadable. It was the same man from the park, the same man who had watched Malik so intently. Malik's breath caught in his throat. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, his eyes locked on Malik's, a sense of finality in his gaze. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and controlled. If you find this video interesting, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button. The man in the dark suit stood in the doorway, his presence filling the room with a quiet, unsettling intensity. Malik's pulse raced. His heart seemed to beat in his throat, and his mind scrambled for answers. The air in the room felt thicker now, heavier, as if the weight of everything had suddenly shifted. Hidden hiding places and secret places had been waiting for him to clear the way and leave the bar. He expertly controlled his body, frustration causing him to forget. "Who are you?" Malik asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't know if he was trying to understand the situation, or if he was hoping the man would simply vanish like some kind of ghost. But the man didn't disappear. The man stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. He didn't answer Malik's question. Instead, his gaze fixed on the phone in Malik's hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was deafening, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. Malik's hand tightened around his phone. The photo of him standing outside the police station stared back at him, and he suddenly felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. The man knew what he had, knew where he had been. Malik swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Why are you following me?" Malik finally managed to say, his voice shaking. He didn't know if he wanted an answer, or if he was simply desperate for something, anything, to make sense of this nightmare. The man in the suit didn't speak for a long moment. Then slowly he began to move toward Malik's bed. His steps were deliberate, measured, almost like he knew the space so well that he didn't need to think about where he was going. The dark suit contrasted sharply with the faded walls of Malik's bedroom, the soft glow of the streetlights outside filtering through the thin curtains. "Do you know what you found, Malik?" The man's voice was low, smooth, yet carrying a dangerous edge. "This isn't something that should be in your hands." Malik stared at him, his mouth suddenly dry. "What do you mean?" he asked, his mind racing. He wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer, but the man's eyes bore into him, relentless, and Malik couldn't look away. The man's lips curved into something like a smile, but there was no warmth in it. It was more of a smirk, one that suggested a level of superiority that made Malik's skin crawl. "You found something that's not meant for people like you. Not meant for anyone, really. It's dangerous." "Dangerous?" Malik's voice cracked, disbelief flooding him. "It's just money." The man let out a soft, almost pitying sigh. He shook his head. "No, Malik, it's not just money. It never was." He took another step closer. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." The words sent a chill through Malik's entire body. He felt lightheaded, as if the ground beneath him might give way at any moment. His hands trembled, and the phone seemed to grow heavier in his grasp. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle, but it was like a million scattered pieces he couldn't put together. "You're telling me," Malik began slowly, "that this money, this envelope I found in the park, is some kind of, trap? Is that what you're saying?" The man nodded. "In a sense. But it's more than that. It's part of a much larger game, one you aren't prepared for. You think you found it by accident, but you didn't. It was meant for you." He paused, and Malik could see something flash in his eyes, something that seemed almost sad. "It's not your fault. You were chosen, but you were never meant to be part of this." Malik's head was spinning. He felt like he was on the edge of something he couldn't comprehend, but he could feel its danger creeping closer, enveloping him. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice more desperate now. The man stepped even closer, closing the gap between them. Malik instinctively took a step back, his feet hitting the side of his bed. He didn't know why he was so afraid, but the man's presence was suffocating, like a storm that was about to break. "I'm here to help you, Malik," the man said, his voice still calm but now laced with something darker. "But you need to understand, this is bigger than you, bigger than anyone." Malik's mind was whirling. "What is this game you're talking about?" Malik's voice was steadier now, though his insides were anything but calm. "And why me?" The man paused, studying him, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Because you have the potential to change things, Malik. More than you know. But first you need to understand the rules. You need to understand the people behind this, what they want, and why they'll stop at nothing to get it." On Monday, the Sights returned, with nothing more than a pocket Bible and a note. Malik's breath caught in his throat. "People? What do you mean?" The man's eyes softened for the briefest moment, as if he was contemplating how much he should reveal. But then he straightened, his expression hardening once again. "There are groups, Malik. Powerful ones. They've been operating in the shadows for decades. And this money, this envelope, it's a piece of something much larger. Something dangerous." Malik felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his suit and pulled out a small black notebook. He opened it, flipping through the pages until he stopped on a specific one. Malik couldn't see what was written on the page, but he could tell it was important. "I didn't want you to get involved," the man said softly, almost as if talking to himself. "But it's too late for that. You've already been marked." "Marked?" Malik repeated, the word hanging in the air. His mind was spinning, trying to grasp the full weight of what was happening. "What do you mean, marked?" The man didn't look at him immediately. Instead, he closed the notebook, his expression unreadable. "They're coming for you, Malik. They'll stop at nothing to get that envelope back. And when they do, there won't be a place you can hide. No one will be able to protect you." The words were like a punch to the gut. The room suddenly felt much colder, and Malik felt like he couldn't breathe. Everything had escalated so quickly, and now he had no idea who to trust, what to believe. This man in the suit was telling him things he couldn't comprehend, things that made him feel like he was drowning in a sea of confusion and fear. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and tension. Malik couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dark suit, the man's cold eyes, the warning. The phone messages had stopped, but the fear had only deepened. His mind kept racing, trying to make sense of it all, but it was like trying to find logic in a nightmare. His eyes lit up. Unable to sleep, he rose up and faced Ophelia. "Hey!" he barked furiously. He couldn't even go to school without looking over his shoulder. He walked with his head down, his thoughts consumed by the man's words. "They're coming for you." It played in his mind like an endless loop, a broken record. Who was coming for him? And why? The envelope was still hidden under his bed, But Malik was no longer sure if he could trust it. Was it just money? Or was it something more? Something that could ruin his life? He couldn't keep running from the truth. Malik knew that. He had to confront whatever this was. But he had no idea where to start. The turning point came on a Wednesday evening when Malik was sitting in his room, staring at the ceiling, trying to clear his mind. The quiet outside his window made it seem like everything was normal. But inside, his world felt like it was spiraling out of control. At the podium, there was a knock at the door. It was soft, tentative, almost as if the person on the other side wasn't sure if Malik would answer. He hesitated before getting up to open it. When he did, he found no one standing there. "Impaled," Malik said. But there, on the floor, was a small package. Abram left. His heart skipped a beat. He bent down and picked it up, his fingers trembling. The package was wrapped in plain brown paper, with no markings, no indication of where it had come from. Just like the envelope. Just like the warning. Malik's gut twisted as he looked at the package. What was inside? Should he open it? He took a deep breath, and with a trembling hand he peeled back the paper. Inside was a single key. What do you think Malik will find next? The mystery deepens, and things are only going to get more intense from here. Hit the like button and leave your thoughts in the comments. And now, on with the show.
The key sat in Malik's palm, small and cold, its metal edges glinting under the dim light of his room. He stared at it for a long moment, unable to comprehend what it meant, or why it had been left at his door. His fingers brushed over it, feeling its weight, its chill. There was no note, no clue, just a key. A simple object that suddenly seemed like the key to everything. Or perhaps the key to nothing. He turned it over and over in his hand, his thoughts racing. The man in the dark suit had warned him, told him that he was marked, whatever that meant. He slid the key into his pocket. Not sure if he should leave it out in the open or keep it hidden. If this was part of some larger game, then the stakes had already been raised. Was this key meant to unlock something more? Or was it just another symbol of how deep he was in? Later that night, Malik tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't let him rest. He kept thinking about the man in the suit, the look in his eyes when he'd talked about the dangerous people after him. He had made it sound like this wasn't just some random encounter. There were people out there who wanted the envelope back, people who wouldn't hesitate to take whatever it was, by force if necessary. Malik sat up in his bed, the blankets tangled around his legs. His eyes flicked toward the window. It was quiet, too quiet. He tried to dismiss the paranoia creeping in, but it was there, a nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach that he was being watched. He couldn't shake the thought that someone was out there, waiting. It wasn't the first time he'd felt like this. Ever since he'd found the envelope, he'd been hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the air conditioning, even the faint rustle of leaves outside his window. All of it made him jump. He wasn't imagining it, though. The knock at the door earlier, the package. It wasn't just a coincidence. Whoever left it there knew where he lived, knew what he had. Malik swung his legs over the edge of the bed and reached for his phone. He needed answers. And, for the first time since the envelope had appeared, he felt a flicker of determination. He could keep hiding, keep waiting for things to spiral even further out of control, or he could take charge. He wasn't going to let some faceless figure play games with his life. He opened the camera roll on his phone and stared at the photo of the envelope again. The one with the strange, hastily scrawled letters. The symbols. What did they mean? Was it a code? A clue? He zoomed in on the photo, his heart racing. It was hard to tell, but he could almost make out some sort of pattern. Maybe if he studied it long enough, he would figure out what it was. A German word. The man had said the envelope wasn't just about money. Malik couldn't stop thinking about that. What else was it about? Why was it so important? And why had it been left for him to find? And why had it been left for him to find? He leaned back. He was about to dive into another round of frantic Googling when he heard a noise from the street outside. It was faint, but distinct. The sound of tires rolling over gravel, slowly, as if someone were trying to be quiet. Malik froze, his heart hammering in his chest. Someone was out there. Someone was watching. He grabbed the key from his pocket, his fingers curling around it tightly. The key to what? To the mystery? To his salvation? Or to his destruction? He slipped his phone back into his pocket and crept toward the window, pulling the blinds apart just enough to see. What he saw nearly made him drop to the floor in shock. A car was parked across the street. It was dark, the windows tinted, but Malik could make out two figures sitting inside. The headlights were off, but the engine was running. The car wasn't going anywhere. Whoever was inside was waiting. Waiting for what? Malik backed away from the window, his heart pounding. He felt a rising panic in his chest. This was it. The thing he had been dreading. The moment when everything became real. His phone buzzed in his pocket, jolting him. Malik yanked it out, praying it was a message that could give him some kind of direction. He opened the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. "You're being watched. Don't do anything stupid. The key is important, but not in the way you think. Trust no one. Get rid of the envelope. It's your only chance to survive." Malik's blood ran cold. He stared at the text, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe it. Someone else knew about the key, and they were telling him to get rid of the envelope. But how could he get rid of something that felt like the only clue he had to understanding what was going on? The noise from the street had stopped, but the chill that had settled in Malik's chest wasn't going away. The man in the suit had said they were coming for him, but now it seemed like whoever was in that car was already here, watching him. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that his life was no longer his own. It was being controlled by forces he couldn't even see. Malik was trapped. The next morning he didn't go to school. He couldn't bring himself to leave the house. He was too afraid that if he stepped outside, he would be walking right into the hands of the people who wanted the envelope. Or worse, he would be walking into a trap. Instead, he spent hours in his room, pacing back and forth, trying to come up with a plan. But everything felt like it was slipping through his fingers, like sand in the wind. Every time he thought he had a grip on the situation, something else would happen to throw him off course. The key, the man in the suit, the text messages, the car across the street. They were all pieces of a puzzle, and Malik had no idea how to put them together. By midday, he couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. He had to make a move. Maybe he couldn't trust the people who were sending him cryptic messages, but he knew he couldn't just sit there and wait to be caught. He had to find out what was going on. He grabbed the envelope and the key, shoving them into his backpack. He wasn't sure where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay there. He needed to find answers. As Malik steps into the unknown, what will he discover? Where will the key lead him? The tension builds as the mystery grows darker.
Malik walked out of the house, his heart pounding in his chest. The envelope weighed heavily on his mind, but the key felt even heavier in his pocket. He had to act fast. The car outside his house had been there for hours. He couldn't stay cooped up any longer. It was time to get answers. He didn't know where to go or what to do, but he knew one thing. He couldn't trust anyone. The man in the suit had made that clear. The warning about the key had made it even clearer. Someone was watching him, and he needed to stay one step ahead. Malik decided to head downtown. The public library seemed like a good place to hide, in plain sight. If he was being watched, it would be harder to track him in a place full of people. But even as he stepped onto the crowded sidewalk, his mind raced with questions. Who were the people behind the envelope? Why had they left it for him? What was the significance of the key? Was there something inside the library that would give him answers? As he approached the library, Malik's phone buzzed. He pulled it out of his pocket, his stomach tightening as he saw another text from the unknown number. After he clicked on it, he found 1,000 images of people around a dead car. "They're getting closer. Don't go to the library, it's a trap. Meet me at the abandoned warehouse on 5th. Don't tell anyone. Trust no one." Malik stopped in his tracks, staring at the message. He was already standing in front of the library, the doors just a few feet away. He glanced around, suddenly paranoid. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. But who? The car from last night? The man in the suit? Was he being played? He didn't know who to trust anymore. The warning in the message felt urgent, but the library was the one place he thought he could be safe. Every instinct told him to run in the opposite direction, but something inside him told him he needed to go to the warehouse. Was it a trap? Maybe. But could he afford to ignore it? With a deep breath, he turned and started walking toward the street, heading toward 5th Avenue. The warehouse was even more run down than he'd imagined. It looked like it hadn't seen use in years. The walls were graffitied, the windows shattered. Malik's breath caught in his throat as he approached the door. It was dark inside, and the only sound he could hear was the distant hum of traffic. But there was something eerie about the silence surrounding him. It was too quiet. He pulled out the key and stared at it, feeling a strange sense of foreboding. The key seemed to pulse with some kind of energy. He didn't know what it opened, but he was about to find out. He stood and looked around, watching as energy rummaged through the place, dusting the floor and creating pen-like patterns. He pushed the door open with a creak and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the floors groaned beneath his feet as he walked deeper into the abandoned space. His footsteps echoed in the emptiness. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Malik froze. His heart skipped a beat. It was the man in the suit, the same one who had warned him earlier. "Glad you could make it," the man said, his voice low and calm. "I wasn't sure you'd show." The German was silent, the silence being... Malik took a step back, eyes darting to the door. "What do you want from me?" His voice shook slightly, but he tried to keep it steady. His hand caught Caroline's right arm, and he brought her to her feet. The man in the suit smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm not the one who's dangerous, Malik. It's the people you're about to get involved with. You've already got their attention, and it's not going to be easy to escape." Malik's head spun. Escape from what? Who are they? Who are they? The man laughed bitterly. "You're too far in to be asking that now. I tried to warn you, but you didn't listen." Malik's confusion deepened. He didn't understand any of this. What was he supposed to be escaping from? Who were these people? Why was he in the middle of whatever this was? He glanced back over his shoulder, spotted the door, and started to move off, because... Before he could ask another question, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the warehouse. Malik spun around, heart racing. His eyes locked onto the door. It had been kicked open, and several men in black jackets stormed inside. They were wearing masks. Malik's stomach sank. They were here. "Run!" the man in the suit shouted. But Malik didn't need to be told twice. He turned and bolted, his legs carrying him faster than they ever had before. His mind raced with panic as he weaved through the dark warehouse, dodging crates and piles of debris. His chest burned as he sprinted, the sound of heavy footsteps pounding behind him. He didn't dare look back. He didn't need to know how close they were. Malik's foot caught on something and he tumbled forward, crashing into the floor with a grunt. His hand shot out to catch himself, but it only sent a sharp pain through his wrist. Gritting his teeth, he pushed himself up, but before he could get his bearings, a cold voice stopped him dead in his tracks. "Don't move." The voice was clipped, authoritative. Malik's eyes widened as he saw one of the men step into the light, a gun trained on him. "Get on the ground, now," the man barked. Malik's mind raced. He was trapped. There was no way out. What will Malik do now? Will he escape? Or is this the end of his journey? The stakes have never been higher. And if you're enjoying the story, make sure to like and subscribe. The barrel of the gun pressed against Malik's forehead. His pulse hammered in his ears as he stared into the cold, masked face of the man who had cornered him. He could hear his breathing, ragged and shallow, as he struggled to keep calm. His heart felt like it was going to burst from his chest. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him, the adrenaline surging through his veins. The echo of his footfalls from earlier, the sound of footsteps approaching, it all mixed into a cacophony that overwhelmed his senses. "Get on the ground," the man growled again, his finger twitching on the trigger. Malik's mind raced. He couldn't give up. He had to find a way out of this. The key in his pocket burned against his skin, a reminder that it was the key to something bigger, something dangerous. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he understood. Why was this happening to me? As the man advanced, Malik's gaze shot to the shadows. He wasn't alone. There were more of them in the warehouse, lurking, waiting for their next move. The entire building felt like a trap, closing in on him from every direction. Before him, he could see countless creaks in the passageways with cracks appearing. And then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit him. He felt a perfect calm. The key. It wasn't just a key to a door, to a treasure, or to some kind of vault. No. The key was the key to his escape. It was his ticket out of this nightmare. But he had to make it count. He had to act now, or he'd never get another chance. Saren packed his bags, put his harness on, and marched out to the parade grounds. He swallowed hard and, with a swift motion, pulled the key out of his pocket. The masked man saw him move and instantly leveled the gun at his chest. "Don't try it," the man spat, his voice dripping with venom. But Malik was already moving. Without thinking, he flung the key across the room, towards the farthest corner, where the shadows seemed deepest. So, the man's eyes followed the key as it flew through the air, and in that instant, Malik launched himself forward. He ducked low, evading the man's grip and diving for the nearest stack of crates. He heard the man shout, but he didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. Gunshots rang out behind him, the bullets whizzing past him as he scrambled through the dark, feeling the heat of them so close that they seemed to burn the air. His hand shot out, grabbing onto the corner of a wooden crate just as he caught sight of the key. Lying just ahead of him, a glimmer of light in the dim warehouse. He reached for it, fingers grazing the cool metal, and just as his hand closed around it, a cold voice echoed through the space. "Leave it." Malik froze. It was the man in the suit. He was standing just behind him now, his face shadowed but unmistakable. The gun still in his hand, he lowered it slightly, his gaze unwavering. Malik didn't move. His heart was in his throat. He wasn't sure if he could trust this man, but one thing was certain. The choice he had to make was growing more complicated by the second. I didn't take. The man in the suit's eyes narrowed. Malik clenched his fists around the key, his mind racing. Bigger? Dangerous? What does he mean? Who are you? Malik finally demanded, his voice stronger now, more confident. What's all this about? The man sighed, stepping closer, his tone softer now. I didn't want to get you involved, but it's too late now. The moment you found that envelope, your life changed. Those people in the masks, they're part of a secret organization. One that's been around for decades, pulling strings, controlling things from the shadows. And the key? It opens more than just doors. It's the trigger. Malik felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't comprehend what the man was saying. It was too much. His head swam with confusion. But there was no turning back now. The masked men began to close in, their footsteps getting louder. The man in the suit glanced behind them, then at Malik, his eyes intense. Listen carefully. You're not just a pawn in their game. You are the game. The key is the beginning of something far more dangerous than you realize. You need to make a choice, Malik. Malik stood, frozen. A choice. He didn't even know what the options were. But the man in the suit was right about one thing. It was too late to back out now. Run, the man whispered. Malik's mind screamed at him to do just that, but as he looked around, he realized there was nowhere to run. The doors were blocked, the men closing in, his heart hammered in his chest. Without thinking, he reached up and yanked the key from its hiding place, shoving it into the lock on the nearest door. He turned the key, expecting it to be useless, but as the door creaked open, a blinding light poured through the crack. The masked men froze, and in that split second, Malik made his move. He bolted for the light, his feet barely touching the ground as he ran. The world seemed to blur around him. He heard shouting behind him, but it didn't matter anymore. The door was his only way out. He stepped through the doorway, his body crashing into the cold night air. He wasn't sure where he was or what had just happened, but he was free. At least, for now. Malik didn't look back. He didn't know if the men were still chasing him or if the man in the suit had truly helped him, but one thing was clear. The key had changed everything. As he walked into the night, he realized something. The game was far from over. He was part of something bigger, something dangerous, and he wasn't sure he would survive it. But for now, at least, Malik was free. The end? Or just the beginning of a much darker story? Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This may be the final chapter of this journey, but the mystery is far from over. If you want to know what happens next, check out our other videos. You won't want to miss what's coming. Stay tuned.